Hey sis, each month inside Entrusted Women University, we feature a brand new interview. You can watch the full interview only in Entrusted Women University, but you can check out this snippet right
Question.
now.
I think there's times that you don't know what you're missing until you get a taste of what you're missing, right? And so growing up, my parents took us to the library all the time. We watched Reading Rainbow. We did not have cable. My parents were immigrants, and we're like, we spend money on that. So we really just watched PBS and a lot whatever was on local TV. And so Reading Rainbow, I remember my sister and I would get home, be in front of the TV, ready to butterflies in the sky, right? And so having LeVar Burton read us all these books, in some ways was already so affirming to be like, books are for me, right? And having this black man read to you. And I don't think I thought about that at the time, but when I was looking back at it, I was like, oh yeah, that matters. And I still remember he read the book Chrysanthemum by Kevin Hankey's, and it's about a girl with a really long name that's different and odd and her feeling made fun of. And that's how I felt growing up with my full name and just feeling seen in those moments and those stories.
Well, hello, Entrusted Women. I'm so excited to have Bunmi Ishola here with us today. She is a children's editor with Penguin Random House, or you're with Penguin?
Yep.
Yes. So we're going to talk about all the things. If you're interested in publishing a children's book, um, 0 to 18, well, you don't need a book if you're zero, but that's what your
You
bio says.
do. You do. Technically, you do.
You're saying while you're in the womb. I think I read to my kids while they were in.
Well, you might reach them in the womb, but also before they turn one, that's technically still in the
Oh,
0
that's
years,
right.
right?
Okay,
So,
zero. Right, you don't come out as one. Okay, I'm back, y'all.
at least not in Western culture, you don't, right?
Yes. Okay. So, but if you're interested in that, or maybe you've done adult nonfiction or adult fiction and you want to switch over, we're going to talk about all the things. So I'm so excited to have her here. But first, if you are not familiar with her, I want to read her bio for you. So Bumi's primary focus is on children's books, and she also contributes to the Ink and Willow gift product line, which we're going to talk about because I don't really know what that is. She's interested in fiction and nonfiction for readers ages 0 to 18, with a special love for middle grades, which that is a special year of needing love. And is specifically drawn to stories that authentically explore faith in action, have strong characters, and come from marginalized voices. Bumi is a member of People of Color in Publishing and Entrusted Women. What? When I saw that in your bio, I was like, oh my gosh. And serves on the board for The Word, a storytelling sanctuary, a nonprofit working to build a publishing community that fights for diversity. Prior to working in publishing, Bumi worked in newspapers and magazines and as a middle school social studies and English teacher. Praise God for you.
I praise God for those years. I'm not in it anymore for a reason, but I did love it. I have a lot of good memories.
Wow. Okay. Well, well, most educators will say that teaching middle school is the absolute hardest phase of life to select to teach.
I mean, it can be. I mean, I think every single age has its challenges, right? So I think when I started out actually substitute teaching after undergrad, as I was transitioning, deciding if I wanted to go to grad school or not, and a lot of elementary school teachers were out a lot, so I was in a lot of elementary school classrooms, and they touch you a lot. They want to you to hold them and hug them and everything, and you're kind of okay, back up. And that was a stressor for the younger ones, where I'm every 3 seconds was someone was touching me and in my face, right? You don't have that as much in middle school and high school, or at least in a different way. But there are different challenges with middle schoolers. That is the age where hormones are running wild as they
Wow.
develop. They're also at a stage where they're probably, I mean, kids are always pushing boundaries, but I think in your middle school years, you're really pushing boundaries because this is the first time that you realize your parents aren't always right. The adults don't always get it right. You have an influence on the world. The world doesn't just revolve around you. You actually have an impact on the world itself. I think that's the age that you really start to click to that. And I think that's a lot of pressure as well for a kid to realize my actions really have major consequences. And trying to navigate that can be very overwhelming, very stressful. And then plus your body's changing and you don't know what's happening half the time. So it can be an emotional roller coaster, but they're fun. Like it's kind of cool to watch them be humans, right? Because I think this is the stage where they're truly developing into the human they will be for the rest of their life. And, it had its good moments, but it also had its trying moments too, for sure.
Yeah, it was traumatizing for me. I remember, so my husband and I, we told our kids that stupid and shut up were bad words. Like they were the bad words, along with
Mm-hmm.
the other bad words.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when they discovered in middle school that they're not bad words. And it was like a whole thing like, Mom, y'all told us that stupid was a bad word, and that's not even a cuss word.
You're like, in our household, it is though. So like, we're
Right,
gonna use it the
right,
same way. It doesn't really matter.
right,
Yeah.
right. But I mean, it speaks to that whole, creating your sense of self and your
Yes.
identity
Yeah.
apart from your parents,
Yes.
which we're going to get into because I imagine that would influence the type of literature that's going to go in that particular age range. So,
Yep.
anyway, how did you transition from education over to publishing? Because that's like a big leap.
Yeah. I mean, so I grew up mostly in Texas. My family's from Nigeria, so I did live there as well at some point. But most of my high school and college was in Texas, and
What part? What part?
um, Dallas Fort Worth area for
Girl,
high
bye.
school, and then I went to Texas A&M, so I was in College Station for college, and then I taught in Houston for 7 years. So I've kind of been a little bit all over Texas
Wait,
in
but
my
you know I'm
lifetime.
from Fort Worth. You know I'm from Fort
You are?
Worth.
I was born in Fort Worth.
Girl, I
John
went to
Wayne
OD
Smith Hospital.
Wyatt. We having a moment right now. We having a whole moment. I went to OD Wyatt.
Oh, I have
Shout
friends
out.
who went there. Yeah, my good friends. So I was the first class for South Hills High School in Fort Worth. It was a
Okay,
brand new high school there, and I was the
okay.
freshman. We were the only class there, and then my family moved to Arlington, and so I finished high school in Arlington.
Girl, you had
Yeah,
to come on the interview for me to. Okay, we're back. We're back.
yeah,
Okay, so Nigeria, you grew up in Fort Worth, then moved to Arlington. Okay, back to publishing. How did you
yeah.
get
And
into publishing?
so Texas is not really a hub for publishing, at least not at the time I was growing up. So I didn't really have a concept of what would it look like to work in books. In high school, if I everybody knew I loved to read, the librarian kind of would be like, "Hey, a new book came in," and I would be the first one to check it out from her type of situation. But no one ever suggested go into publishing. They were kind of like, maybe you can be a lawyer, maybe you can be an English teacher, maybe you can be a librarian. Like those were kind of like directions people would direct me in. And so when I went to college, I went for journalism because one thing I definitely knew I liked was like the writing and helping people tell their stories. It wasn't just the reading of the stories I enjoyed, it was that putting it together. And so that's what I got my undergrad degree in. Also, my graduate degree was in magazine publishing. And then I worked for some newspapers and magazines. And I knew I liked magazines. I did not like newspapers.
Mhm.
The news cycle moves so quickly. You really do have to chase the news. And the news that sells oftentimes is not the most positive news. And so it was one of those things where I didn't like how I felt internally doing that kind of work, but I knew that was not a good space for me. And I would be more interested in something that was long form, a bit slower. And so I thought magazines. But I also graduated in 2008, at the very end of 2008, right before a lot of the economic crisis that came up in 2009. And so a lot of magazines were shuttering their doors. They were not hiring full-time writers on staff anymore. And so I kind of was like feeling a little bit like afloat and not so sure what I was going to do. And so I had been working for a cancer magazine for a while, and then they got bought out and things changed there as well too. And so I was back to kind of square one of like, what do I do? Which is how I ended up teaching, because I had substitute taught in some of those gaps in between that. And I was like, I can teach. I like kids. This works. And so um, but I started teaching at a school that was a college preparatory school. And so we were talking to kids from sixth grade. So it was a sixth to 12th grade. Now they actually have elementary schools. By the time it was just sixth through 12th grade. And, our homerooms are named after colleges. We were constantly talking to the kids about like, this idea of how do you get ready for college. And part of that also includes how do you take your passions and the things that you're good at, your gifts and talents, and figure out like what type of major should I have, right? And so as I'm talking to my students about, well, you seem to be really good at this, or you seem to really love this. Have you thought about these kind of careers or whatever? I just recognize like I'm not probably tapping into my own personal like love and talents and things that, my kids joked around with me because my classroom was like the library. They didn't have to go to the library if they didn't want to. They could just like pick a book off of my shelf. And I mean, our librarian was great, but they were just like, we don't even have to go. We don't need to. And so I taught social studies and I still incorporated books all the time into my lessons. And then I switched to English, and it was kind of this running joke of, oh yeah, Mrs. Ishola is always reading and always talking about books. And one day I was listening to a podcast, and an editor was a guest on the podcast. And as she was just talking, I was thinking, that's what I would want to do. Like that feels very much aligned to like when I think about myself at 13 to 18, like that sounds like what would have made me excited. So I found her email address and like sent her an email and kind of just asked her like, how do I get to where you are? And she gave me some advice. I followed that advice, and here I am today. I started to 2018. That was 2018, and now we're in 2024. So yeah, it's been a thing, and I have not looked back or regretted it. And I still remember when I told my students, okay, this is my last year teaching because I decided I'm going to like go pursue publishing. I was kind of expecting the dramatic tears and like, no, you're leaving us, because that happened every time a teacher left. And instead they sat there for a moment and was like, that's right. That sounds right for you, miss. We're proud of you. And I was like, it's like a moment of like, okay, so I'm not crazy here, that like these little kids also are agreeing with me that I'm making a good choice in my transition. So
I love that. And I think it reminds me of another interview that I was doing because talking to somebody in the publishing field about why there is a lack of minority representation throughout publishing, whether you're talking about, Christian publishing or non-Christian publishing, or, it's just a lack. And I think for whatever reason, we don't know about the careers that are available in the publishing industry. It's kind of like, if you do have an interest in English, well, then you could be a professor, you could be a teacher, you could be a writer, like for an entity, but not necessarily do you know about acquisition editors and on up the publishing pipeline. So I really love how God used your work to help you discover or use the
yeah.
podcast really, but it kind of started stirring up when you were
Yeah.
talking to kids about what they might be interested in. I love that. And
Yeah. And I mean, I
I
grew up in a
go
Nigerian
ahead.
household. So the three careers were kind of like, are you going to be a doctor, a lawyer, engineer? And I was like, none of those. I'm not interested in any of those. So even when I think about the people I knew around me, no one I knew worked in a creative field at all. I didn't have any aunts, uncles, parents, friends. Like I could not think of, that just was not the case in the
Well, that's
Nigerian community I grew
cultural.
up
That's
in.
cultural. Is it cultural?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The closest was my dad being the pastor, right? Like that was like, and it was kind of one of those things where I had no context even to like ask the adults in my life, what would this look like? Because they're like, clearly you should be a lawyer. The end. That's all they had as their advice. So I kind of had to definitely forge my own path. And even transitioning to publishing, I would say going back to like why there's so few of us, like I took a $40,000 pay cut to go from teaching to, and so it very much was me being like, God, am I crazy? Should I do this? Like a lot of thought of like, I'm going to put my trust and hope in that this is the direction you're leading me in. But like, I really have no clue whether this is going to work out, because it was a pretty big jump and leap. And they were expecting me to start from entry level again, even though I'd had plenty of years of experience. And, I took that. But I mean, God has been good, because like, 2 years later, I had technically like gotten 3 jumps of promotion, and I had like, doubled what my pay was in some ways, like when I started. So he definitely took care of me and things worked out, but it was definitely a very big leap of faith, even at that moment, to say, okay, I'm going to like quit teaching to do this thing. It pays less. I don't even really know if it's going to work out for me, but like we're doing it. And so I just am thankful that he, had already forged the path ahead of me.
Wow. And you know what? I wasn't going to say that was a barrier, but I knew it was. The entry level positions and the pay
Yep.
comparatively to what you could be offered in another field. It's not exciting. But it's so needed, as we'll talk about, because you essentially are a decision maker, a gatekeeper that's able to open up doors of opportunity for marginalized voices that might not otherwise have an opportunity. Okay, so um, I'll get distracted and go on. But before we dive into that, before we're gonna go into your career, your journey as an editor. But I want to talk about Ink and Willow a little bit because it was in your bio and you said you do some work with them. Can you just tell us a little bit about what Ink and Willow is and what you do with them? And is it
Yeah.
open to others? Is it open to others or yeah?
Yeah. So Ink and Willow, Leslie or Susan, who like really like one of our editors, Susan Jaden, kind of was the visionary behind this, where she was looking for, just within her community and her friend group, she was noticing that many people were looking for creative outlets to express their faith, right? So the first book that they did was a coloring book, that had like Bible verses and other inspirational quotes. And it was just an opportunity to connect as you're doing something creative. It's now grown to be a line that has so many more products, from journals to devotionals to, just planners, games. We've recently did a game, and essentially it's a line that essentially connects your faith to create a creative outlet, right? And it's a gift line because the products are very gifty. They're meant to be given as gifts. They're meant to be received as gifts. So they're not like narrative nonfiction in that sense. They really are meant for you to play. One of the things that we're very proud of is the beautiful design. And so that's an aspect of every single one of our books, whether there is, journaling space and making sure that, the lines are just the right amount of space for you and everything else, whether it's photography, whether it is, illustrations, like it's going to be highly designed. It's always like multicolored and is not the black and white. And the goal is to ultimately just ignite your faith and allow you to express your faith in this creative outlet. So as I mentioned, coloring books are some of the big things. I actually have one right here.
Yeah, I saw some on there.
Yeah, so this is the most recent one, and this one's from Jenna Holiday, who is a spoonful of faith. People might know her on Instagram. She has some products in Target right now too. But this is an example of like a coloring book that this is the first time we've done one with one illustrator only. Normally we have actually multiple illustrators, but there's just like moments for you to just kind of color some, specific things that just to inspire you along the way. Usually when it's multiple illustrators, we also actually will have text on the back that explains a bit more about the why that art was chosen or, any of those things. But since it was all hers, we didn't add any additional text. The one I'm most proud of is the Rise Up coloring book. That one is one that we created for Black History Month to encourage Black women. And so myself and another of our editors, Jamie, we were the ones who got to work on all the back copy as far as why are we choosing this person and why does this quote matter to our culture and to
Jamie.
our faith? And Jamie, Laparoli, yeah. So yeah, she's one of my coworkers, but she's on the adult side more. But I just saw her on Monday actually, so because she's out here in Cali as well. So so we get to work on things. This is another product that we did. It's a Reimagine Home, and it's just kind of a little small book to devotionals, recipes, and tips to just ultimately love your home and use your home to love others through every season. There is probably the thing I'm most proud of and that our team has been most excited about is the Bible is Funny card game. I followed the account for a while, and we were trying to figure out is there something that we can do with this person? He's just, he has this interesting way of taking the Bible and bringing humor to our faith, but while also still reinforcing, elements of our faith. And we were like a card game. And so it's done really well. That we're working on a volume 2 right now. And that's really exciting. So yeah, it's just an opportunity to think about our faith in creative ways and in different types of formats beyond the traditional book. And then as far as you're asking if people can get involved, sometimes we write some things in-house and we just kind of develop it completely as a team. So there's a team of probably 5 or 6 of us editors that kind of meet weekly and we kind of brainstorm and formulate. But we have been getting proposals from agents now that have products, or sometimes something will come to the adult team that maybe doesn't feel quite right. And then we think about, is there an Ink and Willow product in here instead? Or, we've had those conversations. Even with the Bible is Funny, actually, he had sent me a children's book first, and the children's book didn't feel right. But I was like, what can we do instead? And that's kind of where that led. So there are definitely some author connected products that we do for sure. And it just kind of is, looking for the right type of projects with people. But yeah, basically devotionals, journals, coloring books, games, anything that's interactive. There's always an interactive element to the book generally.
Yeah, I think that's good to know. I was sitting here trying to think of Rob. I can't think of his name, but he's a friend of mine, and he's an author, and he does joke books.
Mm-hmm.
And they've taken his joke books and like made cards and all these different like products, I don't know, stickers, whatever.
Yeah.
And you don't generally think about publishing as producing other products, but um I guess if a book does really well, then you have an opportunity to create another product line, make more money. uh
Yeah. I mean, it really is. It's
Essentially,
another
yeah,
income revenue, right? It's another
yeah.
income stream of revenue. So like, if it makes sense, if you feel like the audience would want that, if it feels compatible, then there's always that opportunity to say like, let's do something. And then sometimes what you have works best as just I want to make sure there's a lot of writing space. There's beautiful design to it. I'm trying to. Oh, it's all the way over there. But like we just did like the Black Joy playbook, and an
I saw
author
that,
came
yeah.
to us where and the goal was like she's like, I want as us as Black women to feel like we can, like, how do we take hold of our joy, because that is actually our form of resistance, is to really honestly celebrate joy. But she's like, I don't need to write a narrative nonfiction about my life explaining all of that. What I can give you is a tool book and a guide to how to do that. So there's no trade book for that concept. It's just this Ink and Willow product, because that's how she conceptualized the idea from the beginning, was that it's supposed to be interactive. It's supposed to be an opportunity for you to dive in and really explore. She's like, you don't need my story to know how to capture joy. I need you to look at your story to figure that out, right? So there are times that it's something that you're working on. You might realize like it's less about me and it's more about the user and the reader. And so is there then something like Ink and Willow as a line might be really great to create like a journal or some sort of product that gives them that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good information. You guys check out Ink and Willow, because I was over there, and I might get that coloring book for my mother-in-law because she's an avid colorer. But
Yeah.
I want to switch gears. You mentioned a little bit about Little Bunmi, who was an avid reader, and I so get that because we got one. We got one of those that we were always at the library. When you were Little Bunmi, did you find the books that you wanted, or was there a hunger for something else? And has that influenced your role as a children's editor?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think there's times that you don't know what you're missing until you get a taste
Find
of
it.
what you're missing,
Yeah.
right? And so growing up, my parents took us to the library all the time. We watched Reading Rainbow. We did not have cable. My parents were immigrants, and we're like, we ain't spending money on that. So we really just watched PBS and a lot whatever was on local TV. And so Reading Rainbow, I remember my sister and I would get home, be in front of the TV, ready to like butterflies in the sky, right? And so having LeVar Burton read us all these books, like in some ways was already so affirming to be like, books are for me, right? And like having this like Black man read to you. And I don't think I thought about that at the time, but when I was looking back at it, I was like, oh yeah, like that matters. And I still remember like he read the book Chrysanthemum by Kevin Hankes, and it's about a girl with a really long name that's different and odd, and her feeling made fun of. And like that's how I felt growing up with my full name, and just feeling seen in those moments and those stories. We moved to Nigeria when I was 7. And my dad's a pastor, and some of the churches he had been working on his PhD at the time and so like when he graduated, we moved back. And some of the churches that he had just been interacting with during his time of his PhD were like, oh, well, we want to bless your family as you go off, back to your home country. So they donated like essentially a library to my sisters and brother and I. And so we had a lot of books that got shipped over, and and so we have this. We actually changed our like bedroom closet, essentially used all the shelving as bookshelves, and it was just kind of a whole thing where we had our little mini library. And I would just read those books over and over and over again. Occasionally, like if someone was visiting from the US, they would bring more books. Some of the missionary families, they would share books, and we just kind of like would, swap books. We didn't really have a library, like a public library in Nigeria, not the where we lived anyway. So that was kind of our world, was just kind of reading these same books over and over again and swapping them. And when I came back to the US, I was 12 going on 13. I was starting ninth grade, and I knew nothing about anything. And so people were talking about music or TV shows or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know what none of y'all are talking about. Like I had no cultural context for that. And it was kind of lonely. So I went back to the library, and that's kind of where I spent a lot of my time. And I mentioned like the librarian knew me on site and was like, a new book just came in, here you go. Like she was just kind of like, would just have a stack for me ready to go. I was the kid who I'd have easily 4 to 5 books in hand every day in the hallway, and one of them would be different because I would just use all my free time to read. And in all that time, I don't think I really thought about like whether or not I felt reflected or whether I felt seen or whether any of those things. But I was just enjoying getting lost in the stories and feeling safe in the stories or learning more about the world around me through these stories. But I remember being a senior in college, and specifically we read Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And it's a book that's set in Nigeria, written by a Nigerian author. And here I am at, I think I was probably 20, I don't even know. And I'm reading this book, and I just remember feeling like, this is what I've been missing. Like it was the moment of the light bulb going off of like, don't think I've ever read a book before where I felt like this was me. This, like everything else was kind of like, it was fun, it was exciting, but I was always on the outside. I could have never been a character in one of those books, or I would have not been the heroine of one of those books. And this is the first time that I had a moment of, this completely reflects my culture. And I remember telling some white friends that, and they'd be like, wait, your dad was abusive? I was like, no, not about that, but just like feeling the culture being like, like they went to the most extreme of what it meant to be seen. I was like, no, like you realize that we've never really read books by a Black author in any of our classes unless you took the African-American literature class. Or in high school, I think the only one we read might have been Their Eyes Were Watching God. I don't think there was another one, like it was just one of those things where it was so few.
And that's a hard one. I mean, I mean, all stories about people of color do not have to be hard.
Yeah. And so you have this moment of being like, just that moment of realizing like, wait, I want more of these stories. And there was moments here and there where I read a book and I felt like, oh my gosh, I love this. And I think through like, oh, that's part of why I loved it. It's because it was a Black character, or it was because, the Black character, even if it was just a side character, had so much agency or was more than just a side character when I look back at it now. And I still love the books that I love. Like I love Charlotte's Web. I still love Anne of Green Gables. I still love, not just count what those books did for me at that time, but that moment was when I realized like, oh, I've also been missing this entire other facet of my reading life, right?
Hey sis, I hope you enjoyed that interview snippet, and I want you to be sure and check out Entrusted Women University by visiting membership.entrustedwomen.com to see the interviews in their entirety. And join us next week for more content to help you on your writing and speaking